Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Repackaging Revolution podcast. I'm your host, David Marinak. Today's show is with James Watson with Impact Packaging. Today's title is Click, Sample, Buy, Disrupting the Packaging Supply Chain One Click at a Time. James has a degree in consumer psychology, is a fascinating dude, and I think you're going to love the story about impact. Stay tuned. James Watson, my man, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Appreciate you having me on. Super excited to chat.
Yeah, we had a lot in common, and a lot of times when I'm, and I do these things, it's basically selfishness because you've got a lot of things that I want to learn about. You're doing some things that I think are really, really cool, especially with impact. But the one thing I like to go back because we all have a story. Take us into what took you to the University of Pennsylvania. Were you an East Coaster? I mean, I'm actually familiar with the campus and can't wait to hear your experience.
That was certainly a large part of it. So I grew up in Connecticut on the East Coast. And UPenn kind of checked a lot of different boxes for me. I think first, I wanted to be close enough to home, but not within arm's distance, so not 30, 40 minutes. So
to eliminate the pop-ins that my mother was prone for.
Yeah. So enough so it was a couple hours away, either by train or by driving. I really liked as well that it was kind of a city campus, so having access to do activities in the city and sort of being in the middle of the city was awesome. And then I quite frankly didn't really have a great idea of what I wanted to do going into college either. So I think at the time I thought I was going to do international relations, and I'm clearly not a diplomat, so that clearly didn't quite pan out. But it gave me an opportunity to try a lot of different things and sort of do that for my major, and then eventually kind of hone in on choice and behavior and some more of the marketing stuff.
I just think that is such a cool campus. Now, for those that aren't familiar, it's in and around the Philly area, and there's a couple of other, was it Drexel and a couple other campuses right in and around that whole Philly area, right?
Yeah, Drexel and Temple. Yeah,
that's it, Temple. I couldn't think of the other one. And the thing that's really cool, and our son was being recruited to play baseball, and we went there for a recruiting trip. And I just was absolutely amazed at everything. Looked like it was right out of Harry Potter. It had such a cool vibe and such a cool electricity about it. The students were going because they wanted to go. It wasn't like this. I went to the state university, so I can see where those people were like, well, my mom and dad told me I have to go to college or I have to get out of you guys were there because you wanted to learn, you wanted to kind of, and I just think that whole consumer psychology piece that I want to dig in here too. Did that kind of bubble into after international studies possibly? Was that something that was always in the back of your mind?
Not sort of initially, and you're right about the campus. It's sort of this nice mix of, I feel like a campus feel, but they've carved out this in the middle of Philadelphia, especially the baseball fields and stuff down there.
I know.
It started really because the major that I thought I wanted to do and ended up doing was one called PPE, which was politics, philosophy, and economics. Kind of gives you a round sample of kind of all of those subject matters. But as part of that, a few of the classes that I ended up taking were more on the marketing side of things. And then at the same time, some of the psychology side of things. And was doing on one side sort of case studies more from these larger companies, call it Black & Decker, Unilever, Coke, all these sort of larger, and then learning about sort of the human behavior and sort of psychology side of things, and realizing that these are a lot of the same. These are the case studies I'm essentially reading, but more of sort of the theory of it. So it became this really interesting blend of two kind of spaces that I was a lot more interested in, and then choice and behavior was really exactly that. It was kind of a focus on consumer psychology and sort of a focus within that major PPE, where I could do a balance of more of that kind of data-driven marketing classes and sort of the application, but then learning more on sort of the theory around, judgments and decisions, human behavior, choice architecture, these kind of broader topics that shaped a lot of those case studies that I was reading on the marketing side.
I just think some of that stuff is so fascinating, especially now. Now, when I was in college, you're much younger than me. Psychology was not nearly as honed in. I mean, it was a broader scope. The consumer psychology and anything like that ties right into the way people shop and buy. And of course, I was at even the internet when I was going through college didn't exist. And now that we've got the Amazon effect, if you will, and the data driven and the consumer behaviors, which talk about being able to dial that in. I mean, before they were just, the retailers were guessing and hoping, and, the Sears and those are now defunct, and Kmart's and whatever. But now they can look at the data, they can look at the searches, they can look at consumer behavior, they can look at packaging, and we'll get into all those kind of things that really can and do influence a consumer's, buying decision. It's fascinating.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's those channels that I think were a lot more data driven were the ones that I ended up kind of gravitating to, I think, more throughout my career is almost being able to kind of chart influence of, let's say, advertising or like shopping on a certain platform and sort of how that flows through. And then you can see it almost in a full circle. So you can see it with brands and sort of the claims that they end up putting on packaging, or, how they're differentiating at the shelf. So it ends up, almost taking a lot of those insights and kind of moving it to channels that may not have traditionally been, I would say, to your point, maybe as data driven, but are certainly being shaped a lot more by all that sort of robust data that's really available now.
Yeah, and it's in real time, which is really fascinating too. Is the days of Mad Men and even the old days of Super Bowl commercials where you just threw it out there and hope that the Volkswagen commercial would take off and influence decisions. Now you can see it in real time and tweak it and change it, and even kind of have A/B testing and do other kind of things. It's just absolutely fascinating what's possible. And frankly, how it can shape and change the destinies of companies. I mean, this is just crazy making, but you really can. And I know we'll dig into it, especially from the venture back with what Impact is doing. But so how was it one of those things that from your time at UPenn, you were, working and doing case studies or whatever it is with Unilever? Was there a bit of an internship? How did you get connected with Unilever? And because that's actually one of the big colossal 900-pound gorillas that are out there.
Yeah. It was funny because I when I kind of realized I wanted to go down that marketing route, I didn't quite have an idea if that was more on the agency side, if it was consumer company, what that was. So I ended up just applying to the companies that I had case studies on. And one of those was Unilever. I think it was like a Dove bar soap case study or something like that. So I applied for their internship and kind of got lucky enough to get through it. But that's how I ended up actually starting at Unilever and starting on a brand called St. Ives in the face care space. But it was just because I read about them and, it seemed quite literally the materials that was interesting to me from my major at the time.
Now, where was Unilever based?
Englewood, New Jersey. So
okay, so around there. Yeah, right. Were you on site? Was it digital? Well, I'm just thinking, was that back during COVID, pre-COVID? What was that?
It was pre-COVID at the time. So I was on site for the internship and then kind of the first 2 or 3 years, I want to say, when I was at Unilever. And then either I was living in New York, lived in New Jersey as well, and kind of did the commute in from there.
And that's really, it's interesting because some of those, I mean, so many of our customers in the world, yours and mine, that literally watch and follow these 900-pound gorillas. I don't care what segment of the industry they're in. There's a ton of opportunity to learn from them. There's a ton of opportunity to pivot and do something different in what they're doing. I just remember, companies like Seventh Generation that became a Unilever brand, or the Club Shaver, or whatever that was.
Dollar Shave.
Was the shaving guy was bought up by Unilever.
Dollar Shave Club.
Dollar Shave Club, and those kind of things. And it just seems like, and I don't know what your experience was, but it seems like a lot of times these companies that get bought out, they suddenly fizzle out and die or get lost in the shuffle because of the companies are so big. And if you really don't carry that momentum, I don't know if that was your experience, but I just thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think it's certainly been interesting with some of those, because I think there have been some that have been like super successful, especially for Unilever, some that have been super successful, and then others, kind of like the Dollar Shave one that you've mentioned, that has gotten some bad press or kind of struggled to go from that like D2C model over
Yep.
to more kind of the retail model.
Right.
But I think broadly, I mean, it was such a great place to, I think, learn some of the fundamentals, especially
100%.
coming out of college. You know,
Yep.
they put you into a rotational program to start. So you got experience in different roles in marketing, different kind of cross-functional roles, different brands, different categories, things like that.
Nice.
So, and I loved sort of the time there and sort of getting that fundamental experience and then kind of figuring out within that, you know, where I kind of really, really wanted to specialize.
So take us from there. Let's do a bridge here between the Unilever and Impact. Had it run its course and you had obviously been promoted through the system at Unilever, but did you run into something where it's kind of like, hey, it's time for me to, you know, move on? What was that whole sort of evolution like?
Yeah, I had been doing for about, I think, 3 years there, really a focus on e-commerce and different roles within Unilever. So within
that was the St. Ives and that kind of stuff. Is that correct?
Starting on St. Ives, but then moving into sort of personal care, where it got a chance, and that was super interesting because it was during the pandemic, and we were selling bar soap and hand sanitizer and things like that. So huge kind of channel shift and excitement there. And then moving actually onto one of the acquired brands, Sundial Brands, which was Shea Moisture's kind of the biggest brand.
Very cool.
There. But I think, you know, I think about 3 years of doing kind of similar roles there and really enjoying it, but kind of wanted to try something a little bit different, I think, at that point, and try, I think, a bit of a smaller company with a little bit more autonomy at the time. And actually, our founder, Lisa Marie Essenza, worked on St. Ives in a global innovation role at the same time that I was doing a little bit of digital marketing.
Kidding.
Right when I joined. Yeah. So she had sort of seen a lot of these sourcing problems firsthand, actually working in that role, whether it's, you know, more on sort of like the discovery side of things, you know, challenging with communication, even, you know, emails, texts, contact us, forms, phone calls, all this stuff back and forth. And then even like finding information for new launches, and ended up kind of starting and building Impact back in 2020. So I joined in 2023, and at that point it had grown a little bit, but we had always, you know, chatted about the role, chatted about the company. It was super interesting for me, just seeing it, you know, having the consumer lens on marketplaces really through working a lot on Amazon, and kind of looking at this more from a B2B role in a space that is really, really fragmented, but also generally pretty offline. Or, you know, and that's changing. So it just kind of combined as, you know, a good addition to, I think, some of the things I had done previously in e-commerce, but then this completely new scope and challenge of kind of dealing with bringing an industry more online, more so than anything else. So stars kind of just aligned on the timing.
And again, for those, and again, we'll always put contact information, but it's impactpackaging.com. And take us through when you joined, and obviously you were the director of growth. Obviously so take us through when you joined. Was the site already finished and done, or were you part of that final completion? Because it is a very intuitive, very easy to navigate for those in that space. And I'm not blowing smoke at you. It's very well thought out. So the question I've got is, was that done, or were you part of that whole design? Take us through that.
And so the site itself was done when I had joined. It was up and running, of kind of being a primary packaging marketplace that you could kind of request quotes, samples, technical documents, get connected directly with packaging suppliers. That whole sort of base process was done. But I think really in the last year and a half, we've been kind of growing that to make the experience obviously better for buyers, whether that's brands, resellers, you know, consultants, contract manufacturers, and then as well kind of expanding our assortment on the supplier side. So just being able to offer, you know, more and more components and serve a wider variety of industries. So the bare bones, obviously, of it was there. That was all sort of the team before I joined.
Yeah, but the one thing though to add to that, which is it's like you said, and that's why I want to dig in a little bit deeper. The site itself really, really covers several different segments, if you will. Resellers that are looking for access to these kind of, or this information to kind of potentially sell to their customers, direct customers, if you will, that are looking for take us through that. Who's the target client or targets of the site? What are you trying to do? What's the sweet spot here? Because I think it's a fascinating story.
Yeah. So I would say the largest group of people kind of sourcing on the site is kind of mid-market brands that are pretty fast growing. And what we tend to see is that this group tends not to have sort of a dedicated packaging resource in house.
Yep.
So
Well
having a bit of that additional kind of expertise to help either guide them towards a packaging option, or if they don't have existing relationships with packaging suppliers, having just a broad variety of assortment to choose from and even compare against seems to be super helpful for them. But I would say that being said, I mean, we've had, innovation managers, procurement managers, packaging teams from kind of some of the largest CPGs on the site, kind of requesting quotes, going through the discovery process and ultimately purchasing, but as well kind of contract manufacturers who may be doing a directed buy or kind of trying to move into more of the turnkey space, distributors, resellers. So the goal is really, I think, create a platform that can make any buyer have enough information almost to be dangerous on.
Right.
I would say across kind of, multiple parts of sort of the value chain within packaging.
I just think that medium, that regardless of the industry, that medium size, of course, we've got the mom and pops and the startups that are out there, and we have the 900-pound gorillas. But like you're talking about, that sweet spot, those medium to medium large, or have aspirations to get large or grow bigger, those are they're almost neglected in many instances. And you guys have the ability to be able to cater to them. And like you said, those that may not have access or think they have access or have the time, which is often the case, to go and do this big, massive research and to tie into a company like Impact and be able to kind of get vetted suppliers that are already in or have passed your kind of scope, and to be able to kind of really engage and look at it that way. Had it always been that case? Was it always that, that sweet spot, those medium-sized people? Or was because it's interesting. I mean, I just speak from my perspective, and we all have we try to explain this as, hey, we love the big orders. We love the big customers. We want all that. But we're finding that a lot of those medium-sized clients is really where the growth is. I
think it's certainly the largest segment that we see.
Right.
But what's interesting is even the experiences that we had at Unilever would still have these difficulties kind of doing some of the sourcing, whether it's like everything being a little bit too offline. So you're going through PDFs, broken websites, phone calls, texts, emails, all these different things.
Totally.
And I think what makes it even kind of more, difficult for that mid-market segment is that, especially for the fast growing brands, they may have grown out of almost their existing resources, in the sense that an operations manager or an innovation manager that was previously managing 1 to 2 SKUs may be now managing an entire portfolio or 10, 15 different products.
You nailed it.
And needs to have at least some of the packaging background to know maybe where the pitfalls are, at least, and what to avoid. And I think that's where we can sort of be helpful, which is, accommodate the order sizes with direct to manufacturer pricing that they can, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, these sort of orders that they're eventually kind of growing into to start off with, while still, being able to not make them kind of shell out for a full kind of packaging engineer as sort of their only resource or anything like that.
It's interesting. You touched on a couple of really cool points. And the one thing I've noticed over the years as it's evolved, and again, and I say this respectfully, you're much younger than me. When I got into this space, and the buyers in particular, they held all the cards. When I would walk into the Hoover Company or Moen Faucets or whatever it is, trying to sell packaging in any shape or form, to go through that decision maker, that person handled freight, they handled the SKUs, they handled the indirect, they handled anything having to do with that. But now, over the last 20, 25 years and the internet now, I see a lot of these guys, like you were describing, they've eliminated the traditional old school buyer. They've replaced a lot of that with a computer terminal. And then they get to your guy, my guy, and these people are swamped. They're working 18-hour days, and they don't, and to have the ability to kind of do some, have a partnership, if you will, to have a place where they can kind of get their information, at least, get them started or get them across that finish line so they can move on to something else. I mean, I'd love to get your take on this. I'm finding those target people are just overworked, underpaid since COVID, of course, but I mean, even pre-COVID. And it's just so interesting because you guys really hit that sweet spot of saying, look, just give it to us. We'll handle it. These are the companies we work with or suppliers we work with, and give it to us. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I think the brand and the buyer are still, while they still ultimately kind of control a lot of the dynamics of that relationship 100%. With the supplier, I think you're right that the role of kind of the people sourcing has expanded. And it's not just necessarily like a packaging designer or kind of a procurement manager. And my personal opinion is I think that's because packaging and product design has just become more integrated with a lot of the other cross-functional channels. So designing specific products for a given retailer or a given consumer channel or something like that means that conversation around those nuances needs to happen earlier in the innovation process. And there are just more people involved in that, whether it's a traditional innovation manager, maybe it's someone dealing with finance, maybe it's someone on the kind of retail or the sales team. So the scope of people that I think are then looking for packaging or at least trying to better understand what's out there so they can kind of think about that full launch has kind of increased. I don't think it's just, we certainly don't see it just kind of being the packaging engineer. We see innovation managers at smaller companies. It's even, founders and things like that. So
and sustainability managers and things now, which is a new title. Yeah. Take us into that, because one of the things I had said at the very beginning when reading out your bio was part of your, the company itself is really looking at the sustainability of packaging and the interest in sustainability and the environment and things like that. How is that integrated into your kind of world? I mean, I'm just trying to get a better understanding because there's a lot of people that don't understand sustainability. And I know you do. And I want to make sure that it is whatever we can do to kind of dumb that down for guys like me to understand that this is a big deal. Sustainability is not going away, right? I mean, take us through this because that's really one of the key pillars that your business is built on.
Yeah, 100%. And I think our mission is generally like building a place to source packaging on the planet for the planet. So we always try to incorporate a little bit of that sustainability into what we're doing on Impact. So all of the components that are listed on Impact end up receiving a sustainability score, which is just key details related to recyclability, PCR and recycled content, if it's a bio-based material, and then if it's refill ready, amongst kind of a few other criteria. And really our biggest thing is displaying that early on in the packaging purchasing process so that people can make further decisions related to that. So we try to provide as many options as we can that are either recyclable, PCR, alternate materials that may be new, but also some of your still more traditional materials and rigid and flexible packaging. But what's difficult, I think, is that sustainability means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But most importantly, I think it's fitting kind of what your end goal is and thinking about that a little bit further up front. So, if you want to have, let's say, PCR in your product, understanding if there needs to be a price trade-off somewhere further down the line to accomplish that, or if it's recyclability, what does that mean for the size or the format that you're actually using for your product? So by kind of giving as much of that information really up front in kind of an easily digestible way, our goal is really to try to give brands the flexibility to kind of incorporate that sustainability in the way that makes the most sense for their innovation, because there certainly is not a one-size-fits-all solution to this.
Well, you're exactly right. And it's a 900-pound gorilla in a different sense, in the fact that sustainability is one of those terms, like you said before, it's often misunderstood. It's often misused. People blend it together to think that sustainability is a catch-all for recyclability, biodegradability, compostability, earth-friendly, landfill-friendly. Like, whoa, hang on. But what I thought was really cool, you said a couple of things, and I just want you to expound upon it. The sustainability score, is that kind of your own internal metric, if you will? Because I think that's absolutely brilliant if you have that.
It's an internal metric for us, but it's more of displaying those key elements to try to make that term sustainability a little bit more digestible. So
Yeah.
everything, whether that's the recyclability, if a component is recyclable, making sure that's shown. If there is PCR, showing what that percentage and sort of the flexibility the supplier has to that. Or if it's, maybe something that's a little bit more nuanced for someone that isn't quite in the weeds of things like a bioresin or something like that. Presenting all that information actually on the product page so that, as well as, getting that information from our internal team if there are direct questions or anything like that, but trying to provide that a little bit more upfront so that it's just easier to have a conversation and match up, what the actual end goal is with kind of the right component that actually fits there.
Well, and there was a reason, and it wasn't a trick question, but you nailed it. And the thing that's interesting to me is that oftentimes, back to your consumer psychology, consumers, those people that are making those decisions, if they know in advance that this is a sustainable or an example of a sustainable option, like you said, the sustainability score or whatever it is that has PCR in it, or it's made from some CPLA or whatever it may be, you're capturing that up front because there's a lot of people, even in trade shows and stuff, that their mind is made up. They need to change their packaging. They need to do something that either makes them feel better, makes their end customer feel better, or both, or whatever. But nobody's really owning that space, which makes what you guys are doing brilliant. Because if you can get them up front and get them to understand that this has a sustainability score of X, or this is an option because of X, and whatever, oftentimes, at least I've found, and I'm curious if you have, people will latch onto that. Oh, no, I got to have that. That's got PCR in it, and my mind's made up. That's absolutely brilliant in this world because there's so much misinformation out there when it comes to this terminology and what to do. People I don't know if you've seen this, but I have, because they just get confused, they just keep doing what they're always doing. Yeah, I'll do that some other time. So you see the same people at a trade show the next year, and they're talking about, interesting. I mean, you guys have nailed it on the front end, it sounds like, because if you can catch them like that, you really have a much better chance of being able to close that deal. Would you think?
I think so. And I think it's also difficult if you're on sort of the buying side and you're going to a trade show and need to be seeking out, the 1 out of 10 or 20 components at a given booth from a supplier or something like that, that happens to be the right size, meet the criteria that you may have in mind,
right,
and then repeat that exact same process at, 2 or 3 other booths to try to find the right information. Whereas, on Impact, you can go on, you can filter directly on recyclability, on PCR, on or any other filter you wanted, if it's a particular size, material, things like that. So, part of it I really think is down, and this is some of the choice behavior things, is if you make it easier to make that option available, there's a higher likelihood that those, components are going to get used, or you can kind of help accelerate that shift in whatever direction it may be.
Yeah, and you kind of really brought that full circle, because that's sort of what I was alluding to, and that's where, the easier we make it for people to understand. I don't care whether they're the end user or whether they're the ones that are influencing the buying decision or whatever. And yeah, you're right. And look, let's face it, in this day and age, we're dealing with people that are very limited in time. I'm often amazed that people even go to trade shows anymore. And if they, back in the old days, they would go there to actually do deals. Now they're sending their minions to go and just collect information. But at least at the shows that I've been going to, but to be able to really help them and to be able to help them make their jobs and lives easier to move on to some other, look, everybody's got fires. Everybody's putting out fires all day long. I don't care whether it's in the economy we're in right now or whether it's just your traditional supply chain issues or whatever. But the more we can make their jobs easier and again, allow them to kind of come back and go, hey, let's go back to Impact. They really dialed us in last time. And they're, so there's so many different little parts that you guys are covering. in the business model that I just, that's why I was so excited to kind of talk with you, because I think a lot of people could benefit from this. I hope you like this content. If you want more of it, I put together a specialized packaging alliance, a group of packaging professionals that are in different facets of this industry. We have webinars, we have meetings. The idea is to share information about this great industry of packaging, whether that be from the sales side of things to the marketing, even to the end users. My point with this is I'd love to have you join us, the Specialized Packaging Alliance. Check out the link below to learn more. Thanks. What's the next step in the evolution? What's the next step? Is it driving more people to the site? Is it getting more people to, or more companies to partner with you to gather their products, if you will? Because I see you work with a lot of the Amcors and Berlins or some others, if I have that right, a lot of the manufacturers, if you will, but then you also cater to those end users too. Is it a 50-50 split? Tell us a little bit more about, kind of the overall big picture.
I think it's a marketplace, so we do work on both sides, and both sides help each other out, which is,
100%.
If we can bring on more relevant kind of packaging suppliers, then, there's a greater likelihood that I think a buyer coming on can find the packaging that they're actually looking for.
Agreed.
So for me, I think it's kind of like 3 or 4 different areas, which is, on the supplier side, certainly want to go deeper on kind of continue to expand the assortment. So more in personal care, cosmetics, kind of going deeper in that area that we have. But then, we've seen demand in food, beverage, household as well. So some of those other spaces within primary packaging. And I think expanding that, I think the universe of packaging is pretty wide as well outside of sourcing, whether you have, artwork, testing, financing, prototypes, group, the list goes on there. So I think there's certainly like a service dynamic where, if we can provide a better kind of end-to-end experience, I think that makes it even easier for some of these brand sourcing. And then, project management is super interesting to me as well, which is generally no matter if you're a startup, if you are a large company, there's a varying amount of people involved in the packaging process. There are multiple parties involved, and they all need kind of different levels of communication, inputs, visibility, things like that. So, crafting some of that project management by kind of either creating workspaces or, just a tool that helps manage that a little bit better, I think plays a really important role as well on either speeding up a network time or kind of just making the innovation process for the end user broadly a little bit more efficient. So I think there's a ton of spaces to kind of go into for us, which is super exciting.
So if I was a new visitor to your site and I run a up and coming toothpaste or hand cream, I don't know, I'm making something up, but I get to your site. Did I hear you correctly that whether it's now or in the future, your hope is to be able to kind of I've come in there and I'm looking at a particular tube or something that I've dialed in on, and you're going to then be able to, through Impact, of course, but to get into a workspace where I could custom design that on top in that. So I take that tube and now I can look at, what it's going to take in order to kind of, custom print or silkscreen or label or whatever. Is that a function that you can do now, or is that something you're moving towards?
I think it's more on the project management side of it, as opposed to necessarily, let's say, like the customization or the artwork design, which is like, regardless, step back, like regardless of if you're sourcing on Impact or not, at the end of the day, you're going to need after that someone that's handling artwork and sort of uploading. So, and multiple people need to see that. You're going to need to do samples, compatibility, maybe channel specific tests like an ISTA6, purchase, logistics, things like that. So bringing all of those parties together in a more meaningful way, including sourcing, I think is a really interesting kind of opportunity and space for us as well, because there are just so many people that end up getting involved in kind of that end-to-end process, even past sourcing. And there's varying levels of inputs, but there's always kind of a key group that's kind of managing that project. And that's never really going to change, no matter if that's a large company or a super small company.
Yeah, it is interesting. I went down that graphic design artwork, but you actually went a different direction that I wasn't even thinking about, but you're right, because you've got to be able to, and I often tell our people all the time, is the prototypes and samplings are so critical to be able to put people at ease and to be able to kind of set things up for a longer term success. Meaning, look, we all love the big orders. We want the big orders, but to be able to kind of take somebody through the journey and go, hey, I understand this gig is going to be 100,000 per month and blah, blah, blah. That's great. But if we don't do a prototype and we don't make sure that you do a trial run, and we don't make sure that we make samples so you can test and fill or whatever it may be, that's where a lot of companies get screwed up on. And they kind of bypass that step. They go right to production, which is kind of short-sighted. And suddenly they end up, well, this tube isn't working or it's failing. Yeah, because it's got a essential oil on the ingredient and you didn't have a barrier in there, which was hence why we were talking about doing prototypes and stuff like that. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, exactly. And on the flip side as well, is like if you don't have visibility, I think, onto like how long a lot of these steps are going to take, whether that's maybe it's the shipping, maybe it's some of the testing, things like that. There are downstream implications to that. The worst being a delayed FTTC or something like that. But all of this kind of comes back to being able to get a concise view and sort of being able to manage that project with more visibility, a little bit easier communication. So that's where we're trying to build as well, kind of outside of the marketplace, is tools that can kind of facilitate that. Whether you're a brand that needs that or you're a reseller or sort of a contract manufacturer who may kind of get benefit from that, managing on behalf of a client.
Well, you're touching on so many key points that are out there too in my world. Number one, it's simplifying things, simplifying the process, but it's also talking about the communication part. If there's anything that's out there right now in our day and age, I don't care whether it's airline tickets or rental cars or whatever it may be, it's lack of communication. And that doesn't mean that people are against, logging in and tracking, something, but that's a key element too, is satisfaction when they know where the project is at, not the product necessarily, but where the project's at. Meaning, are we at the development stage? Are we at the material selection stage? Are we at the graphic design stage? Are we at the prototype stage? Whatever that may be. And I think the fact that you guys have bubbled that to the surface is a key ingredient for impact and a key ingredient for you guys for customer success, because half the battle, I don't know if you see it but I see it in my world. People come to us and go, I can't even place an order with XYZ company. They're not even returning my call. I don't even know where my stuff is at. I sent a PO and I followed up and I got nothing. And this is like, what the hell is going on? And I think that's a huge opportunity that you guys have really kind of circled around. So, do you see where I'm going with that?
100%. I mean, I think, the communication sometimes is I think when it's not through the platform, and that's why we try to connect people directly with the supplier sales reps and have them on, is so that there's none of this getting, lost in email or contact us form that's never returned, anything like that. But I think even more broadly, like it's combining that as well with more of a seamless digital experience itself. And there's been some like great research by Forrester Group, McKinsey, all these other studies which come out, which is like, frankly, like the people in buying roles right now, over 60% of them have been born after 1980, which means they've grown up largely with consumer experiences that are rooted in a really seamless digital experience, whether that's Open Table, whether that's or Grubhub for getting your food, whether it's TurboTax instead of there are so many of these different examples where these industries in their consumer lives have been brought online with kind of a seamless digital experience. You can track statuses, you can get easy notifications about where things are at. And if you then move into sort of call it your business life, and that's not there, and it's still kind of more of an archaic and offline thing, I think it's difficult for people in general. So if you can make it more of, I think, a digital experience, and in this case, a project management tool that really incorporates, seamless tracking, I think there's something really powerful there.
Oh, without a doubt. And that's why, it's so interesting that you've identified that too, because packaging is one of those things, and I've explained this to several people in certain facets of the industry when I get into this. In industrial packaging, the heavy, dirty, greasy, grimy stuff, that still seems to be light years beyond. I still get people saying, well, drive to Saginaw, Michigan, James, and sit here in my lobby and we'll go over this project. I'm like, what?
Sure.
I mean, how about Zoom? What's Zoom? I'm like, whoa. But what you guys have captured is that digital experience, which I really think everything is moving that way. And if somebody like Impact can really embrace that and serve up answers and quotes and projects and orders through that digital experience, the sky's the limit. I mean, that's the thing that you guys are, talk about consumer behavior, but talk about today's consumer as well, that they don't want to drive to Saginaw, Michigan. No.
Yeah.
I want to be able to kind of know that my project is being worked on now, that I have information now. And when I log back in tomorrow or tonight or whatever, that we've made progress. And it's such a cool setup. Good for you guys.
And I think it really starts as well with the suppliers, and they're listed on the marketplace, obviously for us, but the way we look at it is much more on kind of the digital transformation for the supplier, and everything starts with like digitizing that catalog. So, whether that's living as a PDF, whether it's kind of on the, website and there's like pieces of data there, but if you can have sort of as a supplier, a centralized kind of digital catalog, that's
good point.
A master catalog your internal teams can use better, whether it's someone maybe on a factory or a sales rep. It's better sales and marketing toolkits, whether that's like instant proposals, sell sheets, 3D renders, things like that. But you almost have to kind of go, in my opinion, go upstream and kind of work on that digital transformation for the suppliers to then be able to enable it more on sort of the brand side and give a brand or sort of a buyer the opportunity to at least have that comparison or, really be able to have that digital experience in the first place.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you said, which even adds to this, is the fact that you would go to one of these suppliers, XYZ supplier company, and say, look, you can digitize your information catalog info onto Impact Packaging as part of this. So many packaging companies are behind the times, and so many packaging companies just literally, and we were talking about that a second ago, but to be able to give them that platform to take their information and put it somewhere that can be easily digested, just like you guys are talking about, that's like a missing link that's been out here for years. And that's something that you guys, I've seen this for the last 20 years. We talked about this before, where a lot of people and companies in this space still think that it's a fad here on the internet, or send our sales guys out there, have them call on them. And it's so backwards. And the fact that you now have, you really have that conduit to be able to say, just give it to us. Give it to us and we will represent that. Is that kind of fair what you guys are doing?
Yeah. And I think it's the marketplace, I think, is one element of it, but it all kind of starts with that digitization, which is like they can come on and be listed on Impact, and then, they're in the selection at a category level. There's a storefront, which is essentially a landing page for them. So it functions as a 24/7 billboard. So maybe that trade show budget maybe can decrease a little bit, and we can talk about ROI there. But more importantly as well, like, it's an internal tool for these suppliers to use as well. So they have an internal view of their entire catalog digitized. They have the key details, some of which they can choose to show to the consumer, some of which, if it's more sensitive like pricing, they can just keep internally. But it's all in one place. It's mobile optimized so that anyone at the company could look at it no matter where they are. And it enables other kind of marketing tools for them as well.
100%.
So when we're working with them, through digitizing the catalogs, we can then automatically create sell sheets and instant proposals so that they can send those out quicker to brands, or even kind of have, like I mentioned earlier, like renders of their images versus, standard plated images for all of their components or things like that. So it's really broadly, I think, digital transformation, the marketplace being a sales channel and sort of a lead driver, but that internal enablement as well is super, super helpful from what we've seen.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, and I know we're beating this to death, but it's so true in an industry that's so tired and behind the scenes, or behind the eight ball is probably a better way to put it. And you guys are really lighting this thing on fire with a different way of kind of, well, you call it digitizing. It's almost like bringing them into the 21st century, for Pete's sake, for some of these companies, right? So how do we support you? What can we do? And I could talk to you for hours because this is really cool. But one of the things I like to do, especially with the podcast, is do anything we can to share your message. Obviously, at the end of this, we'll how do they contact you and Impact Packaging, that kind of stuff. But who can we introduce to you or promote this episode to? Meaning, if I'm in this space and I want to make sure I send this out to our contact people and say, look, Impact Packaging is really kicking ass and taking names, and you may want to take a look. How can we help you? How can we support this and get that out there? Because you guys are on the cusp of something really, really profound.
Well, I appreciate that. That's very generous of you to say. I think, what I like about the platform a lot is that if you are a buyer, you do not need to be pigeonholed into being a brand, a reseller, a contract manufacturer, a consultant, anything like that. I think a lot of people can get a benefit from saying, I want to be connected directly to a packaging manufacturer. I want to know I'm talking to a sales rep. I want to get my pricing directly from that, regardless of kind of what your end objective is of reselling that, making a finished good as sort of an innovation project. So, the more brands or buyers that we generally have, I really believe that between kind of the sourcing and sort of the project management, we can make your life. Yeah, we can make your life easier. I do believe that. And then, on the supply side, we're always looking to bring on new kind of primary packaging supplier partners so that we can extend the offering. And, whether it's providing a better experience for the buyers so that there's more kind of components available, or, if you've been putting off that website upgrade for a little bit too long, or that catalog is in 7 different places, or it's a little bit hard to get some of that information.
Yeah, right.
It's a great place to kind of work with us, and we can kind of make some custom solutions, I think, really for those suppliers, depending on what the largest problems they're facing is, whether that's marketing, whether that's ERP management, whether it's sales channels. So it's the beauty of being on both sides of the marketplace, I guess.
100%. Do they, from the supplier perspective, is this like a license, James? Is this a, what is it, like a contract form? Because I'm sure you've been asked that. Because that also is a very brilliant move, and the fact that there are a lot of companies that have been putting off that sales refresh on their website or whatever it may be, and to be able to kind of augment this, or maybe just replace it in general with coming over to Impact and doing it there, may literally be, right then and there could be a $50,000 swing. And I see a lot of packaging companies get caught up in this. No, I got to do a brand new website. We're going to do this. We're going to take videos, but partnering with an Impact could be that perfect conduit to not having to do that at all.
Yeah. And it'll depend on sort of the supplier in terms of what they're looking for and how many components and sort of the end goal. But what I will say is that, all of everything that we do is done internally. So it's done by people that have packaging experience and then secondary industry experience, whether that's me on the digital marketing, people on the innovation side, client services, things like that. So the big difference, I would say, is that you are talking to people that have packaging expertise first, that can then bring in those concepts that you are looking at, versus going to maybe a cookie cutter B2B agency or someone else that has that industry or that niche expertise, but not the industry expertise, which is so important to marry hand in hand. So that, I think, and there are so many different, whether it's the internal management, website, listing on a marketplace, there's a lot of different kind of sectors there, but that's sort of the common thread, which is, I think, the expertise that we can provide, particularly compared to sort of agencies and specifically is kind of what really sets us apart.
Yeah. And that's, as we land the plane here, that's also really, really brilliant, because agencies, and they rarely do they have any experience dealing with packaging. Rarely do they have even the nuances or the terminology that we all deal with. And subsequently, it is a cookie cutter approach. And But it's amazing to me how many people and companies fall for this. Oh, you got to have this and it's got to be under this platform. At the end of the day, it's beautiful, eye-catching, very flashy, but is it efficient to sell what you're trying to? Does it help you sell more? Does it help you find more leads and generate more clients? And being that, like you said, working with Impact and working with people who understand packaging is a game changer. That's a real different kind of setup than just dealing with any flunky, marketing. And there's plenty of good marketing companies, but they're so caught up in just, making the deal.
And I'll caveat, some of them do good work, and don't get me wrong,
no.
But it certainly helps. I think when you can get on a call with people that have either worked with suppliers before, worked directly with the brands before, and kind of have more of a holistic conversation around your packaging strategy first, and then how digital transformation can kind of supplement that and support that.
Well, dude, let's land this plane. I love this, man. Where do you see Impact in 5 years? Where do you see Impact 10 years? Give us a little bit of a, in your, if you looked out in your crystal ball, where do you want this to be?
I mentioned our mission a little bit earlier in the podcast of sort of being the place to source packaging on Earth or on the planet for the planet. So I think want to sort of continue trucking down that route of kind of making it the marketplace as seamless as possible and sort of that digital experience as seamless as possible, while kind of providing as wide of an array of solutions so that we can, hopefully accelerate that change towards sustainable solutions as well. So
100%.
I think that's continuing on sort of that mission is really the biggest thing for us. And then, I think there's so much space within packaging, past sourcing as well, to kind of tackle, which has similar problems to even just sourcing it being kind of offline and archaic. So the digitization and I think accelerating that industry shift are really two of the areas we're super keen on for the next 5-10 years.
Yeah. And just promise me you'll come back, and I'd love to hear the updates, because you guys are onto something here. You're sitting on a real gold mine. Yeah, brother. This is just really, really cool. And I get to meet people like you doing this podcast. And this is kind of, I knew you win, James Watson. That's all I can say is I knew you win, my man.
Hi, everyone. It's David Baranek. I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you want to see more, here's another video that you can check out, and I hope you'll enjoy it. Thanks.